Hello, Greek students. My name is Greg Wolf, the SBTS Greek tutor. Welcome to the SBTS Greek tutoring services. In this brief presentation, I will discuss several strategies to help you study Greek. First, I'll present some general principles which will help you prepare for the road ahead. Second, I'll emphasize the need to master the basic skills of Greek to help prepare you for advanced skills. Plus, I'll give you some advice on learning vocabulary and paradigms. Master of vocabulary and paradigms give you a firm foundation for ongoing studies in New Testament Greek. We begin with some general principles for learning Greek. We'll talk about some specifics later on. First, it's important to remember why you're learning Greek. You're probably in seminary because you want to serve the Lord more faithfully and in a greater capacity. Maybe you're taking Greek because it's required for your degree track. Perhaps you're just curious about the original languages. Whatever your reason for studying Greek, keep in mind that learning Greek is a lifelong journey of becoming more intimate with the mind of God. If you lose sight of why you're studying in the first place, you may begin to see learning Greek merely as an academic exercise with no real purpose. But we serve a God who eagerly wants his people to know him, and he's revealed himself to us in Scripture. This should motivate us to long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation. Second, it's important that you allow yourself extra time to study Greek because learning Greek is difficult. As a general rule, you should plan to spend about twice as much time learning Greek as you will with any other class. Let me say that again. You should plan to spend about twice as much time learning Greek as you will with any other class. But don't let that discourage you. Rather than spending 2 hours every night studying Greek, set aside smaller chunks of time throughout the day so that your mind is frequently engaging with the language. Remember, your brain is going to get stretched and twisted in ways it's not accustomed to. So the more frequently we exercise our brains, the more willingly it will learn. Consistency is the key. Studying even 1 hour every day will benefit you more than cramming for 8 hours on a Saturday. You must study Greek every day to learn it well. Certainly, if your conscience calls you to rest on Sundays, do not violate your conscience to study Greek. God will honor your studies in how you honor Him. Third, practice good study habits. The best time and place to study Greek is probably not during lunch rush in Scholars Cafe. Find a much quieter place with fewer distractions. Turn off your phone, shut down your email, ask your roommate for some privacy. Then focus on learning. Give yourself the greatest opportunity to concentrate on your studies. Fourth, it may be helpful to find another Greek student to study with. If you're struggling with something in Greek, ask a friend to work through it with you. If the two of you are just completely stumped, go ahead and schedule a study session with the Greek tutor. Yeah, that's me. Finally, it's important that you set reasonable expectations for yourself. Don't expect to be sight reading the Greek New Testament after 3 weeks. Many scholars still struggle to do that. You are embarking on the initial steps of a lifelong journey to read and understand the Greek New Testament. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's really more of an ultra marathon with no finish line, but always with one goal in mind: to know God, to love Him more deeply, and to be drawn into a more devoted and faithful life as one of His children. If you keep all these things in mind, you will succeed. Just like doing anything, long-term competency in any skill requires you to build a solid foundation for the future. For the Greek student, these foundation stones include mastering the Greek alphabet. If you are unable to discern the letters of the Greek alphabet, you'll never excel at reading or understanding Greek. Likewise, once you learn the alphabet, you also need to master proper pronunciation. Learning and practicing proper pronunciation can be quite involved, so I may also provide detailed instruction on this essential skill in the future. Finally, these basic elements of learning Greek require lots and lots of practice. This foundation work is difficult, but necessary. The first step is mastering the Greek alphabet. To some students, this might seem obvious or even just silly, but effective learning of Greek cannot happen without knowing the Greek alphabet and knowing it so well that you never have to think about the letters. Perhaps an example will illustrate this. Imagine learning to read English. You've got many of the letters memorized, but you still struggle with quite a few. Now, as you read this text, can you make any sense out of it? Can you make out any words? What's this text from? Who's the author? What's the subject matter? What could all this gibberish possibly mean? Believe it or not, this is the first paragraph of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's first Sherlock Holmes short story, A Scandal in Bohemia. You'd have to be a real detective to figure that one out. But I hope this exercise demonstrates how important it is to learn the Greek alphabet. One of the best ways to learn the Greek alphabet is to write it out by hand. All the letters of the alphabet, capitals and lowercase. Pronouncing each letter out loud as you do so, along with the sound each letter makes. Alpha, alpha, ah. Beta, beta, b. Gamma, gamma, g. Delta, delta, d. And so on for the entire Greek alphabet. Then do that over and over and over again. Do this until you don't have to think about it. This will burn the alphabet into your brain so that you'll never forget it. This will also help with your Greek penmanship. Now that you have mastery of the Greek alphabet, you need to know how to pronounce the words formed by those letters. In fact, I would suggest that until you've absolutely conquered the Greek alphabet, you shouldn't spend much time at all on pronunciation. First things first. Pronunciation also introduces a word you may not be familiar with, syllabification. That's just a fancy way of saying, this is how we break up words into syllables. To properly pronounce a complete word, you need to be able to break it into syllables. This takes practice. I may put together another video demonstrating these principles in the future. But for now, as you are beginning to learn Greek, try to break the words into syllables and pronounce those syllables one at a time until you build your competence in pronunciation. Good pronunciation will also help you in all other aspects of learning Greek: vocabulary, paradigms, translation, and overall understanding. It's an old joke, but a really good one. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. When you've mastered the alphabet and learned how to break up words into syllables, you must practice these skills. Try to set aside a few minutes every day for simply reading the Greek New Testament, even if you don't understand the text. Slow down, Break the words into syllables and pronounce each word out loud until you can do it proficiently. Do this every day until reading Greek is as easy as reading English. But again, you can't do this unless you absolutely master the Greek alphabet. These foundation stones are so crucial to your success in Greek that I've dedicated this section to them. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to learn these basic introductory skills. Your entire Greek learning journey relies on it, and without it, you'll struggle to succeed. There are lots of tools for learning vocabulary, whether it's handmade flashcards, a pre-printed set of cards, or some form of electronic flashcard tool. You have many options to choose from. Which one is best? Well, drum roll, please. The best vocabulary tool for you is the one that works best for you. Some students tell me they can't live without physical flashcards, especially the ones they've made themselves. They say there's something about the feel in their fingers and creating the cards from scratch. Others tell me that physical flashcards are too much of a bother. Some students do all their vocabulary learning on a smartphone. Every time they have a spare minute, they're reviewing words in the grocery store, waiting at a restaurant, even watching TV. At the same time, a lot of students have told me how helpful the Beginning with New Testament Greek flashcard set is because of the memory devices included. But then, after they've learned the words through those flashcards, they prefer to use gntvocab.com, an electronic tool, to review and reinforce their learning. That method may be a good place for you to start. Whatever method you use, just keep in mind that building your Greek vocabulary is not a sprint. It's a marathon that lasts your entire life as you study the Greek New Testament. Remember, if you're taking Dr. Plummer's class, you only need to learn 345 words over a 15-week semester. So if you commit to learning 5 to 10 words per day, you'll be far ahead of schedule by the end of semester. But also know that there are better ways to learn vocabulary. Trust me, I've been learning vocabulary for many years, and I want to share with you a method that may help you retain the words you learn as your vocabulary grows. Now, even though I'm using the interface from gntvocab.com, this process works the same no matter what method you prefer to use. When you learn a new word, the first thing you want to do is focus on the Greek word itself. Don't even think about the English definition at this point. I've blurred that portion out of the flashcard to make my point. Take the time to really learn the Greek word. Look at each letter and consider how to pronounce the word. Observe the accents and breathing marks. If it is a noun, take note of the article associated with it, because that will tell you if it's a masculine, feminine, or neuter noun. Many flashcards also give hints on how nouns are declined. Now, pronounce the word out loud, syllable by syllable, several times. Plasso, plasso, plasso. Now pronounce the word as a whole, taking into account the proper accentuation. Plasso, plasso, plasso. Say it over and over until you can pronounce it easily without any hesitation. This may sound a bit silly at first, but when you think about it, if you can't pronounce a word, how are you going to remember it? And if you can't remember a word, how can you remember its definition? This step comes easier the more familiar you are with the Greek language, but it's worth the extra effort in this step to practice proper pronunciation. Now, focus on the definition. I form shape. See if there's anything familiar about this definition, as many similar Greek words may have similar meanings. This is also a good time to come up with a helpful memory device for the word. For example, plaso kinda sounds like plastic, which can be formed and shaped however you want it. Once you really know the definition of this word and have a good means of associating this Greek word with this definition, say the Greek word together with its definition several times. Plaso, I form shape. Plaso, I form shape. Plaso, I form shape. When you know you've got it, you're ready for the next step. Now, when you're quizzing yourself on your vocabulary, when you see a Greek word, rather than hunting and pecking for a definition from the list of words which might be the correct one, focus on the Greek word only. Again, I've blurred out the definitions for now. Pronounce the Greek word out loud, making sure to consider the accents and breathing marks. Plaso. Make sure you know this Greek word. Now, try to remember everything you can about this word. Perhaps you can recall the memory device for this word. Oh, yeah, plaso kind of sounds like plastic, which can be formed and shaped. That's right. Plaso means I form shape. Plaso, I form shape. Now, since you know the correct definition for this word, look one by one through the options for that one correct definition. It's not Peter. It doesn't mean a Greek. It's not sincerely, truly. It's not a reproach. There it is. I form shape. Ding, 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 ding. And you can select it as the correct answer. You don't even care what the other answers are because you're looking for that one correct answer. Now, this method is slow. It's intended to be slow. Remember, we're not in a sprint, we're in a marathon. But this method requires you to learn your vocabulary slowly and deliberately. And if you review your words using this method, once you've seen a word 15 to 20 times, there's a good chance you'll retain that word much longer. I'd like to close this section with a few additional tips for learning vocabulary. First, just like any type of learning, begin by establishing a good learning environment. When you're in the middle of a big commotion, it's probably not the best time for learning vocabulary. Your brain needs to work in a very different way to learn vocabulary, so be nice to your brain and give it the quiet space it needs to learn. Second, be consistent and be committed. Try to set aside time for vocabulary every day. Make it a part of your morning devotional routine or part of your lunch break. Just be consistent and you will grow your vocabulary. Third, don't overwork your vocabulary. This may seem counterintuitive, but if you try to cram 50 to 100 new words into your brain every day, you simply won't be able to retain them. Aim for 5 to 10 words a day, and your brain will thank you. And at that pace, you could easily learn 2,000 words or more in a year. Fourth, and this is important, learn your vocabulary for each chapter before you begin studying the chapter. This will make much more sense once you do it. But let's say you're studying a chapter, and throughout the chapter, the author keeps referring to the words in your vocabulary. Each time you run across those words, you won't be able to understand what's being taught. But when you know all the vocabulary for a chapter before you begin studying, you'll be able to read along, understand, and engage with everything as it's presented. This is a critical step in learning and understanding Greek. Next, keep in mind that your daily vocabulary learning should become boring. Don't learn the words to the point that you think you have them pretty well down. Learn them until you're bored and find your mind wandering. This is an indicator from your brain that you don't need to think about the words anymore. Once you've learned your words, keep reviewing just a little longer. You should feel a bit irritated and impatient seeing those same words over and over again. This is an indicator that the words aren't on the fringe of your mind, but beginning to settle deep into your long-term memory. Finally, spend time in God's Word, the Greek New Testament, even if you only look at one verse a day. This practice will help your mind become more comfortable with Greek and will establish a lifelong pattern you can use for the rest of your life. After all, the reason we learn vocabulary is not to impress our friends. We're learning vocabulary so we can read, study, meditate on, and teach the Word of God more faithfully and more powerfully than before. Keep this in mind, and you will have all the motivation you need. At this point in your studies, you may not know what we mean by a paradigm. A paradigm is simply a pattern that similar Greek words fall into. Knowing paradigms help you understand how words are used in Greek sentences. This applies to nouns, verbs, adjectives, and pronouns. So knowing your paradigms is a critical step in learning Greek. Let's take a look at a basic paradigm. One of the first paradigms you'll learn is the present active indicative forms of the verb luo, which means to loose or destroy. Now remember, this is not a grammar lesson. I'm teaching you a method for learning paradigms, not the paradigm itself. For finite verb paradigms like this, you have forms for the first person, second person, and third person. But these verb forms also occur in singular and plural forms. When we see luo in its original form, this is the first person singular form, which means the subject is I. So we have I loose or I am loosing. Notice how I've highlighted the ending of this verb. When this verb is in the second person singular, its form is lues and means you are loosing. Notice how these two words have the same beginning, but the endings, highlighted in red, are different. Thus, the form of the verb also tells us how the verb is used in the sentence. Moving on to the third person singular, we have lue. Again, a slightly different ending, and this means he, she, or it is loosing. We move now from singular to plural. The first person plural, luomen, means we are loosing. The second person plural is luete, which means y'all are loosing. The final verb form for this paradigm is the third person plural, luusin, which means they are loosing. The final letter in parentheses indicates that sometimes this verb form has a final nu and sometimes not. So, why is all this paradigm stuff important? Well, for all the Greek verbs that behave the same as luo, and there are a lot of them, every time your verb has these endings tacked onto them, you will know the subject of the verb. For example, if you see a verb that has a stem with omen attached to the end, you know that it is we doing something, whatever the action of the verb is. When you see the a ending, you know that he, she, or it is doing the action. When you see the o ending, you know that it is I or the speaker who is doing the action. Every verb ending with usin means they are doing something. This is all great. But how do we remember all these verb forms? And you should prepare yourselves now because there are about 100 different paradigms you'll need to learn in a typical first semester of Greek. Well, the best way to learn a paradigm is to write it out and say it out loud as you do so. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusin. First, notice that I didn't draw the chart here, nor did I include the chart headings. Because paradigms are so common and similar, there's no need to include these headings. Over time, you will just know the layout of these paradigms. Now, it's really important to write out and sound out these paradigms as you learn them. You want to feel the pen or pencil in your hand, hear the sound of the words as you speak them, and see the various forms as you produce them. Unfortunately, many of you may be thinking that this can't be all, right? Well, you'd be correct. This is not all. Because the only way to really learn and memorize a paradigm is through repetition. So, once you've verified that the paradigm you wrote is correct, write it out and sound it out again. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusin. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Invest in a ream of paper. Write out the paradigm until your fingers are tired and you find yourself daydreaming about other things. When you start thinking more about your other classes, or what's for supper, or the laundry that's piling up on the floor, it's an indicator that your brain no longer must work hard to put these charts together. It's now on autopilot. So when your professor asks you for the present active indicative paradigm for luo, you quickly scribble out luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusin. And on a quiz or exam, that equals max points. Again, I'd like to give you some additional tips for learning your paradigms effectively. First, learn one paradigm at a time. Don't try to write out every paradigm you know or need to know all at one time. When you're learning paradigms, you need to recognize the pattern, and seeing that pattern over and over will burn it into your brain. Focus on one paradigm at a time, and you'll retain it much better. Second, just like learning vocabulary, learn the paradigms before you study the chapter. Skim the chapter briefly to see if there are any paradigms you need to learn. Then learn those paradigms first. Get them down so you know them like the back of your hand. Then, when you study the chapter, you'll be better prepared to understand the actual grammar content of the chapter. Finally, don't assume that once you've learned a paradigm, you'll never forget it. Occasionally, you should review your earlier paradigms to make sure you haven't forgotten them. And remember, all the paradigms you learn early on in Greek apply to everything else you will learn. Having a solid understanding of paradigms will help you read the Greek New Testament more fluently and confidently.